In the frozen pre-dawn darkness of November 9, 1330, 30,000 Hungarian warriors found themselves trapped in a killing ground from which there would be no escape. They had marched into the lands of their enemy with confidence, with banners raised high, believing victory was assured. But as the sun rose that morning over the hills of Wallachia, it illuminated not triumph, but annihilation. Within hours, one of medieval Europe's most devastating ambushes would reduce a mighty army to scattered corpses and fleeing survivors. The architect of this catastrophe was no crowned king, no legendary knight, but a Wallachian voivode whose name would echo through history as the founder of a nation. This is the story of the Battle of Posada, where cunning and terrain defeated overwhelming numbers, and where the seeds of Romanian independence were planted in Hungarian blood. To understand how such a disaster befell the Kingdom of Hungary, we must first journey back to the political landscape of Eastern Europe in the early 14th century. The Kingdom of Hungary, under the rule of the young and ambitious Charles I of the House of Anjou, had spent decades consolidating power and extending its influence across the Carpathian Basin and beyond. Charles, who had only secured his throne after years of internal struggle against rival magnates, was determined to assert Hungarian dominance over the territories south of the Carpathian Mountains, regions collectively known as Wallachia. These lands, caught between the expanding power of Hungary to the north and the declining Byzantine influence to the south, had long existed in a state of semi-autonomy, paying tribute to various overlords but never fully submitting to any single authority. Wallachia itself was not a unified kingdom in 1330, but rather a collection of territories ruled by local voivodes, military leaders who commanded the loyalty of free peasants and lesser nobility. The land was harsh, mountainous in the north where the Carpathians formed a natural barrier, and transitioning to plains in the south toward the Danube River. Its people were a mixture of Romanized populations, descendants of Roman colonists who had settled Dacia centuries before, mixed with Slavic and other influences. They were pastoral, warrior-like, and fiercely protective of their autonomy. For generations, they had resisted full incorporation into neighboring powers, using the difficult terrain to their advantage and employing guerrilla tactics when faced with superior forces. The rise of Basarab, whose name may have derived from a Turkic or Cuman title meaning father-ruler, represented something new in Wallachian history. By the late 1320s, Basarab had managed to unite much of the territory under his leadership, establishing what historians would later recognize as the first independent Wallachian principality. He ruled from fortified positions in the southern Carpathians, maintaining a network of wooden fortresses and utilizing the natural defenses of mountain passes and dense forests. Basarab was not merely a warlord, he was a state builder, and his growing power directly threatened Hungarian interests in the region. For Charles I of Hungary, Basarab's increasing independence was intolerable. Hungary had long considered Wallachia part of its sphere of influence, a vassal territory from which tribute should flow northward. Moreover, control of the Carpathian passes was essential for Hungarian trade and military access to the Black Sea region. When Basarab began minting his own coins and conducting independent foreign policy, including making alliances with Bulgaria and the Byzantine Empire, Charles recognized that a military response was necessary. The Hungarian king also faced internal pressures. Having finally consolidated his rule over the fractious Hungarian nobility, Charles needed a successful foreign campaign to demonstrate his strength and unite his kingdom behind a common cause. In 1330, after Basarab refused to appear at the Hungarian court to renew his oath of vassalage and reportedly withheld tribute, Charles decided the time had come for a decisive military expedition. The Hungarian king assembled an army that contemporary sources, though often prone to exaggeration, consistently describe as massive. Modern historians estimate the force at between 25 and 35,000 men, an enormous army by medieval standards. This was not a simple raiding party, but a full royal host, including heavily armored Hungarian knights, Croatian and Transylvanian contingents, German mercenaries, and infantry levies from across the kingdom. The king himself would lead the campaign, accompanied by many of Hungary's most powerful nobles and church leaders, including the Archbishop of Esztergom, the highest-ranking prelate in the Hungarian church. The Hungarian strategy was straightforward and, on paper, seemingly foolproof. The army would march through Transylvania, cross the Carpathian passes into Wallachia, force Basarab to submit or destroy his forces, and return before winter made the mountain passes impassable. Charles anticipated that the sheer size of his army would force Basarab into either immediate submission or a pitched battle that the numerically inferior Wallachians could not possibly win. What Charles failed to appreciate was that Basarab had no intention of fighting on Hungarian terms. As the massive Hungarian army descended through the Carpathian passes into Wallachia in late summer of 1330, they found a land seemingly abandoned. Villages were empty, granaries burned, livestock driven away. Basarab, understanding that he could not defeat the Hungarians in open battle, had implemented a scorched earth strategy. The Wallachian population retreated into the mountains, taking everything of value with them, leaving the invaders to march through a wasteland. This tactic, though devastating to his own people, served multiple purposes. It denied the Hungarian army the supplies it needed to sustain itself in enemy territory, it prevented Charles from bringing Basarab to battle on favorable terms, and it forced the Hungarians to extend their supply lines dangerously far from their bases in Transylvania. The Hungarian chroniclers, written by supporters of Charles, admit that the campaign began to go wrong almost immediately. The army marched for weeks through hostile territory, finding neither provisions nor enemies to fight. Soldiers began falling ill from bad water and inadequate food. The autumn weather turned foul, with cold rains making the march miserable. Morale began to deteriorate as the soldiers realized they were chasing ghosts through an empty land. Charles pushed his army south, deeper into Wallachia, possibly reaching as far as the Danube River, hoping to force Basarab into submission or combat. But the Wallachian voivode remained elusive, harassing the Hungarian columns with small raids, but never committing to a major engagement. By early November, Charles faced a grim reality. Winter was approaching rapidly, his army was exhausted and undersupplied, and he had achieved none of his objectives. The king made the decision that any commander in his position would have made: retreat. The Hungarian army would withdraw back through the Carpathians to the safety of Transylvania before snow blocked the passes. This decision, though militarily sound, was exactly what Basarab had been waiting for. The Wallachian voivode had spent months preparing the trap that would destroy the Hungarian army, and now his enemy was walking directly into it. The route chosen for the Hungarian retreat would take them through a region known as the Posada Valley, though the exact location remains debated by historians. Most scholars place it in the southern Carpathians, likely near modern-day Kampulung or in the Argeș River Valley. The terrain in this region is characterized by narrow valleys, flanked by steep, forested hillsides, perfect for the type of ambush Basarab was planning. The voivode had positioned his forces, estimated at between 10 and 15,000 men, along the heights overlooking the valley through which the Hungarians would pass. These were not knights in gleaming armor, but light cavalry, archers, and infantry familiar with mountain warfare, men who knew every path and hiding place in their native land. Basarab's tactical genius lay not just in choosing the location, but in his patience. He allowed the Hungarian vanguard to pass through the valley unmolested, luring the main body of the army deeper into the trap. The Wallachians waited, hidden in the forests on the heights, as thousands of Hungarian soldiers filed through the valley below. The column was stretched out over miles, with the heavily armored knights and nobility at the front, the infantry and supply train in the middle, and the rearguard struggling to keep up. It was a formation perfect for marching, but terrible for defense. On the morning of November 9th, 1330, Basarab sprung his trap. As dawn broke over the valley, Wallachian forces emerged from the forests on both sides, raining arrows down on the Hungarian column and rolling boulders down the slopes into the packed mass of soldiers below. The narrow valley became a death trap. The Hungarian knights, though individually formidable, found themselves unable to maneuver or deploy their cavalry effectively. The steep slopes prevented them from charging up at their attackers, and the press of soldiers behind them made retreat impossible. It was not a battle, but a slaughter. Contemporary accounts, though fragmentary and often contradictory, paint a picture of utter chaos. The Hungarian army, caught in column, could not form proper battle lines. Units became separated and surrounded. The heavily armored knights, the pride of Hungarian military might, found their armor became a liability as they struggled in the rough terrain and under the relentless missile fire from the heights. Horses panicked, adding to the confusion. The Wallachians, fighting from positions they had carefully prepared, could strike and withdraw, attack and fade back into the forests, never allowing the Hungarians to bring their superior numbers to bear in a decisive engagement. Charles I himself, caught in the disaster, fought desperately to extract himself and his nobles from the killing ground. According to Hungarian sources, the king was at one point surrounded and nearly captured or killed, saved only by the sacrifice of several of his nobles who gave their lives to cover his escape. The Archbishop of Esztergom was not so fortunate. The prelate, weighed down by armor and perhaps age, was cut down by Wallachian soldiers, his body stripped and left among the thousands of other corpses littering the valley floor. As the day wore on, the Hungarian army disintegrated. Some units managed to fight their way through the ambush and continue the retreat northward. Others broke completely, soldiers fleeing individually into the mountains, where many would die of exposure or be hunted down by Wallachian patrols. The supply train, the lifeline of the army, was completely lost, its wagons looted or burned. The most conservative estimates suggest that the Hungarians lost at least one-third of their army in the battle and the subsequent retreat, with some sources claiming casualties as high as half the entire force. Thousands of Hungary's finest warriors, including many nobles whose families would take generations to recover from the loss, perished in the valleys of Wallachia that November. Charles I, battered and humiliated, eventually made it back to Hungarian territory with the remnants of his once proud army. The defeat at Posada was one of the most catastrophic military disasters in Hungarian history, comparable to later defeats at Mohacs or Muhi. The political consequences were immediate and far-reaching. Basarab, rather than being crushed as an insubordinate vassal, had decisively demonstrated Wallachian independence. The principality he had founded would endure, evolving eventually into the Romanian nation. Never again would Hungary be able to assert the same level of control over Wallachia, though conflicts would continue for centuries. For Basarab himself, the victory at Posada secured his legacy as the founder of the Wallachian state. He ruled until his death around 1352, consolidating the principality's institutions and expanding its territory. His descendants would continue to rule Wallachia on and off for generations, including his great-grandson Mircea the Elder, and eventually the infamous Vlad III, known to history as Vlad the Impaler, whose reputation would inspire the Dracula legend. But it was Basarab at Posada who first proved that a Wallachian leader could defeat the greatest powers of the region through tactical brilliance and intimate knowledge of the terrain. The Battle of Posada also demonstrated principles of asymmetrical warfare that would be repeated throughout military history. A smaller, lighter force with superior knowledge of the terrain and the initiative could devastate a larger, better-equipped army if that army could be caught in the wrong place at the wrong time. Basarab's scorched earth tactics and refusal to fight on his enemy's terms showed strategic wisdom that would be emulated by defenders from Russia to Vietnam in centuries to come. The battle was a triumph of preparation, patience, and ruthless execution. Yet we must also consider the human cost of this victory. The thousands of Hungarian soldiers who died in the valley, far from home, pursuing their king's ambitions, were not merely statistics, but individuals, men with families and lives cut short in the service of medieval power politics. The Wallachian people, who had seen their land devastated by the scorched earth policy and would face Hungarian retaliation in future years, paid a heavy price for independence. War, even in victory, is never without its tragedies. In the broader sweep of European history, Posada might seem a minor engagement, a battle between regional powers in the Balkans that had little impact on the great affairs of kingdoms and empires. But for the peoples of the region, it was a defining moment. It marked the emergence of Wallachia as an independent principality, the beginning of a Romanian political identity that would eventually lead to modern Romania. It showed that the peoples south of the Carpathians could resist incorporation into larger empires, that their independence was not merely granted by the tolerance of greater powers, but could be won and defended by blood. The battle also had theological dimensions often overlooked by modern secular historians. Medieval chroniclers on both sides interpreted the conflict through the lens of divine will. Hungarian sources portrayed the defeat as God's punishment for the sins of the kingdom, perhaps for Charles' earlier struggles against the legitimate line of Hungarian kings, or as a test of faith. Wallachian sources, though fewer in number, saw the victory as proof of divine favor for Basarab's cause, evidence that God supported Wallachian independence. The death of the Archbishop of Esztergom was particularly troubling for Hungarian theologians, as the fall of such a high church official in battle suggested either divine disfavor or demonic influence. Archaeological evidence from the region, though not definitive, has provided some support for the historical accounts. Mass graves and weapon deposits have been found in the southern Carpathians that may date to the period, though conclusive identification is difficult given the many battles fought in the region over centuries. The absence of a precisely identified battlefield has led to some historical debate about the exact location of Posada, with various sites proposed by Romanian and Hungarian scholars, sometimes influenced by nationalist considerations rather than purely historical evidence. The diplomatic aftermath of Posada was complex. Charles I, though defeated, remained King of Hungary for another 12 years until his death in 1342. He never again attempted a major campaign against Wallachia, though border conflicts continued. Basarab, for his part, did not attempt to press his advantage by invading Hungarian territory. He understood that Wallachia's strength lay in defense, in making the cost of invasion too high for potential enemies to bear. He negotiated from a position of strength, securing recognition of Wallachian autonomy, while maintaining enough diplomatic flexibility to avoid provoking another massive Hungarian response. The legend of Posada grew over centuries, becoming a foundational myth for Romanian national identity. In the 19th century, as Romanian nationalism developed and sought historical validation for an independent Romanian state, the Battle of Posada was elevated to the status of a defining national moment, the birth of Romanian statehood. Historians and poets celebrated Basarab as a national hero, the founder of the Romanian nation. Paintings and monuments were created depicting the battle, often with significant artistic license. While modern scholarship has been more measured, recognizing the complexity of medieval identity and the anachronism of projecting modern national consciousness onto 14th century events, Posada remains central to Romanian historical memory. For students of military history, Posada offers lessons that transcend its specific time and place. The importance of terrain in warfare, the value of intelligence and preparation, the vulnerability of armies operating far from their bases in hostile territory, the effectiveness of guerrilla tactics against conventional forces, all of these principles are illustrated by Basarab's campaign. The battle also demonstrates the psychological dimension of warfare, how the erosion of morale through hardship and harassment can make an army vulnerable to catastrophic defeat. As we stand today, nearly 700 years after that November morning in 1330, the battlefield itself has returned to the peaceful landscape of the Romanian countryside. The forests have long since reclaimed whatever physical traces of the battle once existed, yet the consequences of what happened there ripple forward through time. The independent Wallachian principality that emerged from Posada would endure through centuries of Ottoman pressure, Habsburg expansion, and Russian interference, eventually uniting with Moldavia to form the Romanian nation in the 19th century. The Battle of Posada, then, was not merely a tactical victory, but a strategic turning point that helped shape the political geography of Eastern Europe for centuries to come. In the final analysis, the Battle of Posada stands as a testament to the power of determination and intelligent leadership in the face of overwhelming odds. Basarab, with inferior numbers and resources, defeated one of the era's most powerful kingdoms, not through superior strength, but through superior strategy. He understood his enemy, his terrain, and his own limitations, and he crafted a campaign that turned Hungarian strengths into weaknesses and Wallachian weaknesses into strengths. The trap he set at Posada was sprung with devastating effectiveness, and 30,000 Hungarian soldiers learned, too late, that the path through the Carpathians was far more dangerous than they had imagined when they marched south with such confidence only months before. The frozen ground of that November morning absorbed their blood, and from that blood rose a nation.